Find yourself first, or recognize yourself first as the witnessing presence of awareness in the background of experience. Recognize yourself as that and be that knowingly. If it is not clear to you that you are the witnessing presence of awareness in the background of experience, you can just ask yourself a question such as, what is it that knows or is aware of my experience? And with this question, allow this question to invite the mind to relax the focus of its attention from the objective content of experience and to sink back, relax back into its essence. I am not my thoughts. I am that which knows my thoughts. I am not my feelings and sensations. I am that which is aware of my feelings and sensations. I am not the world. I am that which perceives the world. So in each of these three examples, I is the name that we give to the knowing or aware or perceiving element in all experience. It is not something that we can know, be aware of, or perceive objectively. The way to know the presence of awareness is to be the presence of awareness knowingly. Of course, we are essentially the presence of awareness. So when I suggest recognize yourself as the witnessing presence of awareness, I'm speaking to you, awareness. You, awareness, recognize yourself. Instead of shining the light of your knowing on the content of experience, relax your attention, come back to yourself, remember yourself, recognize yourself, be with yourself, be as yourself. Our knowledge of ourself, that is, awareness is awareness of itself, is the simple, ordinary, intimate experience to which we refer when we say simply, I am. Before I am is qualified by experience. That is, before I am becomes I am this or I am that. In other words, the experience I am refers to our naked being before it is clothed in experience. And just as we tend to lose touch with our naked body when we get dressed in the morning, so we tend to lose touch with our naked being when it is clothed in experience. But just as it is possible for us to return to the experience of our naked body any time during the day without getting undressed, so it is possible for us to return to our naked being at any time during the day, without changing or getting rid of any experience. Simply be with the experience of being, which is another way of saying simply know being. Be aware of being. And then at some point there is this great revelation that either strikes us in a moment or gradually dawns on us, namely that the awareness of being is happiness itself. Now, having recognized yourself as the presence of awareness that lies behind your experience, feel yourself as the space-like presence of awareness within which your experience arises. Understand and feel that the presence of awareness is like a borderless space, a vast openness, within which the entire content of experience arises, including the flow of perception, flow of sensations that constitute our experience of the body and the perceptions through which we perceive the world. Instead of believing and feeling that the body is in the world and the mind is in the body and awareness is in the mind, we understand and feel that the body, mind and world appear in me, awareness. I do not appear in them. And now understand and feel that everything that appears in awareness is made of awareness, just as all the waves and currents that appear on or in the ocean are made only of water. Awareness itself has no form, no inherent form, but assumes all the forms of experience. Now we might ask a question. If I am formless, infinite, indivisible awareness, why do I believe and feel that I am a temporary, finite, separate self, and as a result suffer? So I would like to try to answer this question, both how and why do we seem to become a temporary, finite, separate self or ego? And I will do my best to try not to become philosophical, but to explain this in a way that enables us to follow in our actual experience, not just intellectually. So first of all, why does the infinite seem to become the finite? And the answer is this, or one answer is this. The infinite by itself, being infinite, is formless. It is a realm of infinite potential, in which all forms lie in potential. But in order to manifest this infinite potential in actuality as a universe, infinite awareness must seem to become a finite awareness or a finite mind, because it is only possible to know or perceive a finite universe or a finite object from the limited perspective of a finite subject. In other words, the infinite cannot know the finite directly. It must do so through the agency of a finite subject or finite mind. In exactly the same way that when we fall asleep at night, we cannot perceive the dreamed world directly. We have to seem to become a character in the dreamed world, from whose point of view or through whose sense perceptions we view the activity of our own mind as the dreamed world. So in exactly the same way, I would suggest that each of our finite minds, and by finite mind I mean the activity of thinking and perceiving. Just pause to recognize this in your experience. Your current experience, your current objective experience is a mixture of thinking and perceiving. That's all there is to our individual experience, thinking and perceiving. And by thinking and perceiving, I include all feeling, sensing, imagining, etc. So just as the dreamer's mind views the dreamed world through the sense perceptions of the dreamed character that it seems to become, so infinite reality or infinite awareness perceives itself or its own activity as the universe through the sense perceptions or through the finite mind that is each of us. And this is why when thinking and perceiving come to an end, as they do in deep sleep, there is no experience of the world. It is not possible for awareness to experience the world if not through perception. Perception is like a pair of glasses. The faculty of perception is like a pair of glasses that awareness puts on, that enables it to perceive itself as the universe. The faculty of thinking is then added to the faculty of perception, like one of those, like a pair of clip-on dark glasses. Awareness then clips on the faculty of thinking to the faculty of perceiving. And it is with thought that we divide up what we perceive into numerous objects and selves. So thought is like a lens that is placed on top of the lens of perception, and there is a fine grid on the lens of thinking which fragments what is perceived into an apparent multiplicity and diversity of objects and selves. So, between them, perceiving and conceiving, perception and thought, are like the filter, the glasses that awareness puts on, that one enables its formless self to appear in form or as form, and two, refracts that form into a multiplicity and diversity of objects and selves. In other words, the faculties of perception and thought are the means by which the one appears as many. Or, in religious language, the means by which God's infinite being appears as the universe. Now, please notice that at this stage we haven't said anything about a separate self or an ego. We've just spoken of unlimited awareness, formless, infinite awareness, and the finite mind, that is, the faculties of perception and thought. Now, before going on to address the question as to how the sense of the separate self or ego develops from the finite mind, I'd like to answer one question. Why can't infinite awareness know the world directly? Why does it need to know the world or the universe through the point of view or via the agency of a finite mind? And the answer is simply this. Try to imagine what the universe would look like if it was perceived directly by infinite awareness. In fact, to make this simpler, try to imagine what a single object would look like if it was perceived directly by infinite awareness. Now, take any object. Let's take a flower, or take a tree. Imagine a tree and take an image of that tree from a single point of view. And now walk to the other side of the tree and take a second image of the same tree from a second point of view. We now have two images of the tree. And now walk slowly round the tree, and every 10 paces stop and take an image of the tree. And by the time you get round to the place from which you started, we now have 20 images of the tree. Now, superimpose all those images on top of one another and imagine what the image would look like. Would it look like a tree? No, it would be a chaos of shapes and colours and lines. And now, imagine taking an image of the tree from every single location in space, including all those locations within the tree itself. We now have billions, a countless number of images, and superimpose them on top of one another and imagine what that image would look like. It would just be blackness, dense, dark, deep blackness. That's what the universe would look like if awareness were able to perceive it directly. In other words, it would not be able to perceive the universe directly. In order to perceive an object, and by extension the universe, as a single thing, or as a coherent thing, it must do so from a single point of view. Hence the need to localize itself as a finite mind, that is, each of us, from whose perspective or through whose agency it perceives itself as the universe. The finite mind, that is, each of us, is a bundle of thinking and perceiving. Through which awareness perceives itself as the universe. The finite mind is, as such, not an entity, it is not a thing. It is an activity of infinite awareness, just as the character that we seem to become in a dream, from whose perspective we view the dreamed world, is not an entity inside our own mind. It is simply the localized activity of our own mind. I hope I'm not losing anyone. So understand that you, the finite mind, are not a discrete and independently existing entity in your own right. You are the localized activity of thinking and perceiving, through which, or in the form of which, infinite awareness is able to actualize a segment of its infinite potential in form. Now, it's very important to understand that the activity of thinking and perceiving does not create the universe. This would be conventional idealism or leading to solipsism. The faculties, the finite mind, that is the faculty of thinking and perceiving, is the means by which the pre-existing reality, because reality, infinite consciousness, pre-exists the finite mind, appears as the world. So reality itself, infinite consciousness, is present prior to the finite mind. But it is through the finite mind that reality appears as the world. And this was beautifully expressed by the Romantic poet William Wordsworth when he was describing the world. And he referred to the mighty world of eye and ear, that's the world that we perceive. The mighty world of eye and ear, both what they half create and what perceive. So he's saying that the faculty of perception half creates the world we perceive, but half perceives the pre-existing world. In other words, reality, the reality of the world, pre-exists the finite mind. It is infinite consciousness. But the appearance of the world is derived from the finite mind and appears in accordance with its limitations. So the world as we know it is both created and perceived through the finite mind. It is perceived because the reality of the world is what is really there. In that sense, the finite mind perceives, or awareness perceives what is really there through the finite mind. But because awareness looks through the glasses of the finite mind superimposes its own limitations on reality and makes it appear as the world. So the finite mind both creates the appearance of, and at the same time perceives the reality of the universe. The mighty world of eye and ear, both what they half create and what they perceive. So this answers the question, how and why is the finite mind created? Why? In order to allow reality to appear as the universe, in order to allow infinite consciousness to manifest its potential in form. How? By infinite awareness localizing itself as the activity of perception and thought. Now, the next question. How does the sense of being an ego or separate self arise? What is the relationship between awareness, the finite mind, and the separate self? I use the words separate self and ego synonymously. So far there's no problem with the finite mind. It is simply the means by which infinite awareness unfolds itself as the universe. Not only is the finite mind not problematic, it is as such the instrument of love, the instrument of creativity, through which the intelligence and the love that is the nature of reality unfolds itself in form, manifests itself in the universe. Not only is it not a problem, it is the instrument of creativity and manifestation. Now, what is the relationship between the finite mind and the separate self, or the ego? The separate self, or ego, is simply a thought that arises in the finite mind, but not really in the finite mind, because the finite mind is not an entity. The finite mind itself takes the shape of a thought which believes or states that I, the finite mind, am a discrete and independently existing entity or self in my own right. With that belief, the finite mind seems to cease being simply the activity of infinite awareness and becomes, or seems to become, a discrete, independently existing entity. Of course, it never really becomes such. It is just a belief. That is the ego. In other words, it is the equivalent of the dreamed character, the character in the dream that we seem to become, through whose agency we perceive the dreamed world. It is as though the character in a dream were to assert, I am a character independent of the dreamer's mind. I have my own reality, my own independent existence. This is absurd. The dreamed character is simply the activity of our own mind, the activity through which, or in the form of which, we are able to perceive the activity of our own mind as the dreamed world. The dreamed character never becomes a character. It just it doesn't believe, because it is not present to believe something. Our own mind takes the shape of a thought which says the dreamed character is a real character. Likewise, one of the thoughts that arises, the finite mind, takes the shape of a thought that says, I, the finite mind, exist independent of infinite awareness. That belief alone is the ego. And all our suffering, and by suffering, please understand, I don't mean pain. I don't mean resistance that arises on behalf of the safety or the well-being of the body, of our body, or the body of one who is in our care. I don't consider that to be suffering. When I speak of suffering, I mean psychological or emotional suffering. Let me just pause here and make a very clear distinction between pain or distress that arises on behalf of the body and suffering which arises on behalf of the illusory separate self or ego. Physical pain or distress rises on behalf of the body. And one of the ways to distinguish between the two, if you are in any doubt, is that physical pain or distress, that is, resistance that arises on behalf of the safety or well-being of the body, does not require the support of thinking. If you are in physical pain, the physical pain does not depend upon thinking. You can be in intense physical pain without having any thoughts. Likewise, if you are hungry, there is an inherent discomfort to the experience of hunger. Hunger is supposed to be mildly uncomfortable, except in extreme cases, of course. Hunger is supposed to be uncomfortable. We are supposed to resist it, because that is what makes us respond by eating. If our house is on fire, we don't need to refer to thought to resist the situation. The resistance to the situation is a natural instinct that arises on behalf of the preservation of the body. Pain, hunger, an emergency in the environment, none of these experiences require the support of thinking. That's one of the ways, a very clear way of determining whether or not our resistance arises on behalf of the body or the separate self. Now, take the experience of jealousy. The body can be in a perfectly healthy, satisfied condition when we feel jealousy. So the jealousy does not arise on behalf of the body, and the jealousy obviously does not arise on behalf of awareness. The jealousy arises on behalf of an imaginary self that is created with the thought, I am a separate, independent entity. And it is not possible for jealousy to exist without thinking. This is one of the ways of distinguishing, a very effective way of distinguishing between pain or distress, and psychological or emotional suffering. Psychological and emotional suffering always requires thought to support it. And the primary thought, which lies at the heart of all psychological or emotional suffering, is the separate self thought. I am a temporary, finite self. In other words, all our afflictive emotions arise on behalf of an illusory self. So I hope I have made it clear in an experiential, not just a philosophical way, the relationship between awareness and the finite mind and the separate self or ego. Of course, these are not three separate things. The finite mind is the activity of infinite awareness, and the separate self or ego is a single activity of the finite mind. Now I hope that this analysis that I have given will also answer another question that is often asked. Namely, how is it possible to live in the world in a way that is consistent with the non-dual understanding? To which my answer is, how is it possible to live sanely in the world without this non-dual understanding? Because it is not the activity of the finite mind that comes to an end when we recognize our true nature. It is one tiny part of the finite mind, namely the belief that I am a temporary finite self, that comes to an end. All the rest of the faculties of our finite mind continues. The finite mind is simply washed clean of the belief I am a temporary finite self and all the other beliefs that spring from that primary belief. That aspect of our thinking gradually disappears on the recognition of our true nature. But the activities of thinking and perceiving that constitute each of our finite minds continues. The activity of thinking and perceiving is simply cleansed of the distorting filter of the sense of separation. And as a result, it functions much better in the world. The finite mind becomes the means by which the nature of reality, peace, love, beauty, intelligence, happiness, peace, is expressed in the world. Such a mind, that is a mind that has been cleansed of the belief of separation, becomes an instrument through which reality or infinite awareness manifests its innate qualities in life, in experience. And all the qualities that we most admire in human beings, kindness, dignity, compassion, empathy, generosity, humor, affection, justice, peace, equity. All these qualities are qualities that are the inevitable expression of a mind that has, to a greater or lesser extent, been washed clean of the sense of separation. Courage would be another one. In other words, all of these qualities, the qualities that we most admire in human beings, are not really human qualities. They are divine qualities. They are the qualities of the divine expressing itself through a human being, and as such being shared in humanity, with humanity. And all the qualities that we least admire in human beings, I don't need to list them, are those qualities that are filtered through a mind in which the belief in separation is still active or present. In other words, these qualities that we least respect in human beings are how the divine qualities of intelligence, peace, love, beauty appear when filtered through the sense of separation. That's why the Shankaracharya, Shantananda Saraswati said, even hatred is a manifestation of love. It's why the experiences of grief and love are so closely associated. In other words, grief is really love tinged with the sense of separation. Our sorrow is really our happiness veiled by the sense of separation. And this is why in this approach all we really do is investigate the nature of I, the nature of ourself. Everything depends on our knowledge of ourself. It is not possible to have right knowledge of anything before having right knowledge of ourself. It's why the words "know thyself" were carved above the entrance to the temple of Apollo in Delphi 2,500 years ago, and stand as an invitation to humanity to recognize the nature of reality, the nature of ourself, the same understanding that lies at the heart of all the great Eastern wisdom traditions. The recognition of the nature of ourself puts an end on the inside to all afflictive emotions, puts an end to our suffering. But it doesn't stop there. It flows out, this knowledge flows out from inside us into the world in the form of all the qualities that we love and admire. Justice, tolerance, compassion, empathy, kindness, generosity, courage, affection, and so on and so on. All these qualities are simply the inevitable manifestation of the recognition of the nature of ourself. Peace and happiness on the inside. Love, beauty, compassion, kindness, tolerance on the outside.